jamás no me lo han dicho. Vayan que Paco y tengo jatamunado. Algo han pair poco. Kuchay mi taita. Kuchay.
We are here today with Alex Fischman Cárdenas, who directed Ovejas y Lobos, or Sheeps and Wolves, that will be showing at the Coconut Grove Film Festival this year. Alex, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Wonderful. Thanks so much for being here. I'm really happy to be able to show the film at this festival.
Amazing. We are so happy to have you as well. Now, I thought your film was so powerful in how it showed such a raw love between a mother and her son. And I was reading your director's statement with the film, and you had mentioned that there were some personal ties to your family that you felt when working on the film. So I was curious, how did this story come about, and was it based on your family, or did you see those ties after it?
No, so I think with film, at least for me, it's always a way of stitching little hidden messages within myself in the lives of other people. So we didn't experience the internal conflict in Peru the way that the people in the story did. But I do think that the underlying themes about like the relationship between the mother and the son, the overprotectiveness, or like the desire to separate and forge your own path, or the feeling of not being listened to, or like that relationship and those like emotional truths, I find to be in my experience. But I wanted to take that and apply it within this context, which was something that I was really interested in to explore.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. And with that being said, yes, you explored some of those relationships and some of those themes later. When you were creating the character, the mother, either through working with the script or deciding how you wanted to portray it, did you base anything, any of the actions of the mother in the film at all based on your own experiences, or did you see a lot more of those connections and parallels afterwards when editing?
Oh, that's interesting. I think, so it's a mixture of things. I definitely knew I wanted like the mother to be a very strong character. That's something that like was always consistent in every iteration. And I think a lot of like what actually happens with the mother and what the character is a mixture of like personalities from across my own family, but also in researching people that experience more of the literal story that this takes place in. So I did several interviews with people that their sons had disappeared, or their husbands had disappeared, what it was like, and that helped inform a lot of the decisions of like who this character is and how they behave. And more towards like the editing, as I was finishing the editing, I sort of for the first time realized what the movie meant to me, or like why I wanted to make this movie. I think a lot of the times that comes, like many times I just make movies because I feel there's something pulling me towards this direction to tell this story, but I didn't necessarily understand what it was. And I think I just understood what it was when I was editing and when I was seeing it with the music and all these little small decisions that as a director you're making, from like what's the music like in the scene, what's the acting like in this scene, what's the mood like in these places. Those are all decisions as a director you're making. But like when everything gets together and when everything gets put together, that was the first time I realized what those decisions meant for me.
Absolutely. And you had also mentioned in your director's note that a lot of this movie began taking shape in the editing room. Could you touch a little bit more on that, with more focused on the film, what that meant for you?
Yeah. So the first cut of the movie was 30 minutes long, and we brought it down to 17. So that's like a significant chunk of what it has to be removed. And I think a lot of it was some of like the slowness of the film that was always like a big aspect of it, to show like the reality of the story and how like time just moves slower there than in the city. So it just always, I felt that there was always a need to breathe, and we started to cut some of that out as we were editing. But I think in regards to the story, the biggest change that happened to the edit was for the ending. and I don't know if this is going to be played after the audience has seen this or before or.
They are free to watch it before, so I don't want to give any spoilers, but I did see that you noted that you had changed the ending a bit.
Yeah, I think the ending changed, and I won't speak as to like literally how it changed, but what it changed was I felt that realizing that this movie is about a character who loves their son, and that's like the biggest thing about this character that we really know, is that she loves her son more than anything. And I felt it was unfair to this character to leave her ending in more despair after all she did in the film was to show her love, honestly. So I felt that the ending needed to change, and so we took a scene that was meant to be played before the ending and took it as the real end, where instead of showing like more despair and more loneliness, I think we get to acknowledge that she is doing the best she can, in a way.
Absolutely. And I want to go back and touch on, before you mentioned you had interviewed a couple people about stories of their disappearing loved ones. Was this film based on one of those specific interviews, or was it kind of a combination of everyone's stories?
It was definitely a combination. There's many stories from this era, unfortunately, of what happened, and there's a lot of research and like museums and places to put in place. So I was really thankful that I went to some of these museums and talked to the people that were like leading some of the research departments, and they put me in contact with people that were around this. So it was a mixture of like reading, interviewing, talking, and just like hearing the general sense of how just heartbreaking and like that feeling of powerlessness of having someone disappear, as it being even worse than the feeling than just a death. There was something about like that not knowing that made it so much worse for the people suffering through it. So that was one of the things that I was inclined to.
Absolutely. And there was clearly a lot of work that went into this project with the research. I know that you had mentioned that you wanted to look a little bit more into the armed conflict, and then speaking with families of those who had lost loved ones. What was the timeline in preparing to create and then execute on this story?
Yeah, it's very long. It started in 2019. When I first had the idea of like the basic premise of a mother whose son disappears and it's her search to find the son, and that was the kernel in 2019. And I was gonna be doing this for a school project as my thesis film for NYU, and it was 2020, so we couldn't film, so the film got postponed a few years out, and we got to film in 2022. But during that time, like, there was still work done on the script, on the actors changed, the location changed. We were gonna film it in Cusco, and then we pivoted to Huaraz, and like there were just a bunch of like production changes in those 2 years. And I'm thankful for everything that happened. I think it was a blessing, really, to have that extra time to do it.
Absolutely. And having gone and spoken to people who lived through this armed conflict and lost their loved ones, did you see any pushback when you were sharing your idea of the story you wanted to tell? Or did you find that a lot of these people wanted these stories of the disappearances to be told so more people knew about them?
I would say in general, everyone was pretty... So, in most places, I would say that people were really interested in this idea or in like conveying these stories, especially because it wasn't about like a specific story or like it wasn't like about a specific person. It was more like a story that encapsulated a bunch of these anecdotes. I would say there were some cities where the trauma felt closer and they weren't so open as to talk to strangers, because part of the investigation was also knocking on doors and talking to people in some of the areas that were most affected, and those were some of the areas where the people were less inclined to talk to.
Absolutely. And this is a very heavy topic, especially for those who had loved ones disappear, and then that on top of almost your emotional connection because of how it relates to your family. What did working on this film mean to you? Did it cause any emotional distress, or was there anything that was extremely upsetting when working on it?
I think I always, for me, this story, I tend to make movies that are just like about or in the past at least, that were just about like negativity, or just always about like how traumatizing this is or how brutal this is to live through. Those are in general like the types of movies I made. What felt really nice about this movie is, as much as it is a movie that like really, really bad things are happening, for me, I get more emotional when I see all the love that is kept through with the mother. So that's for me what brings more emotion out of me, rather than the misery or the hardship. I think is seeing the love within, even in those circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about the film itself. It's just so beautiful. I want to talk about the colors in it for a moment, because the entire time I was just watching, and it just so lovely, between the mountain and the landscape to the actual settings in the church being this beautiful color of blue. And what really stood out to me was the red jacket of the son and then the red markings of the armed group. So I was just curious, was there anything that you loved in particular about the film when looking at color or the landscape that you wanted to speak on?
I think shooting up a mountain is really sick. Like, it's one of those things that doesn't happen in daily life. Like, I live in a city where there's not many mountains around, so it's one of those things that I kind of forget. But just being next to a mountain really like imposes this towering quality over you that's almost unfathomable. I think landscape-wise, at least, that's like one of our best decisions was to move the film to a house that had like that mountain. Finding that house was really hard. Just a house that was secluded, but also like easily accessible on the road, so we didn't have to worry about the production too much. And yeah, I think the scale of that is something that for me was very important within this. The other thing that we got lucky in the production, and this was mostly luck, is that we were shooting in rain season, and fortunately it never rained on us, but it was always cloudy. Wow. And I think those clouds really add a lot to that feeling of despair that the movie has. And it's one of those things that we really didn't control.
Absolutely. You were quite lucky that you didn't have to deal with a lot of that rain, because that would have caused some complications in your shooting schedule. But shooting on that location and a little bit more remote away from, let's say, back in New York where you're working and you can easily access more equipment, did you face any other complications when trying to film there?
Oh, yeah. It was hard. Like the sheep, honestly, like used to carry like a bigger role in the film. And that was a very difficult thing to work on, just because like our animal wrangler was a 9-year-old girl. That like the mom didn't want to do it, and she just sent her 3 kids to do it, and the 9-year-old was the oldest of the kids, and she had to. So it was really hard thing to control. It would baa whenever it wanted, even when we were shooting in sunset. And we also didn't really have much lights. Like there's only 2 scenes in the movie that really are. There's only one scene in the movie that has like more than 1 light, I think. I am fairly confident saying that. Like our equipment package was pretty small, and we worked with a lot of like the natural light in most of the scenes.
Awesome. Is there anything that you are really looking for the audience to take away from this film, or something you want to tell them before they watch it?
I don't know. I think I hope you take something away from this movie. It's a movie that I think plays very quietly, almost. It's like it's really asking for your attention to look at it and see how it incorporates into your own life. Or because I never made the movie for it to be just as a movie about this subject that's super specific and super foreign to a bunch of the audience members that might watch it. Like it's very rare to find someone that has like really related to this experience. But I would say almost see it as like, where does this metaphor apply to your own lives? Or where does this story apply or make sense for you?
Absolutely. I think that's so interesting that you made it to play quietly so we could all relate, and it's not just right in your face with the story. I think that's so beautiful and really just encapsulates the film. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. It is such a pleasure that we will be playing your film at the festival this year, and I hope that everybody watches it and gets to enjoy it just like I did.
Thank you so much, Katelyn. These were great questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you.